An interesting question was posed to me the other day in the comment section of my Pirates Precon upgrade video on how I would actually build this deck because they weren't interested in the Reanimator strategy that Admiral Brass actually presents in the deck. So I'm going to take a look at the other commander that was included here, Don Andres the Renegade, to see what we can do and make a nice pirate deck that really isn't a pirate deck where we're dealing with the creature type, but more of you become the pirate. So for those who don't know what he does, Don Andres the Renegade, for 1, a blue, a black, and a red, you get a 4/3 vampire pirate. Each creature you control but don't own gets +2/+2, has menace and death touch, and is a pirate in addition to its other types. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell that you don't own, create 2 tapped treasure tokens. Now, I've mentioned this in a couple other videos that this is not a commander that you want to play in a group that is not comfortable with you handling their cards or doing things to what they have going on. So you're going to have some rule zero conversations. But for the intended purposes of this deck tech, I don't care what the other players are doing. We are going to go to the maximum level of piracy with this. So let's take a look and see what we can put in this deck to take advantage and leverage both halves of this card. Let's take a look at one of the most synonymous creatures with stealing things from our opponents, Agent of Treachery. For 5 blue, you get a 2/3 human rogue that when it enters the battlefield, gain control of target permanent, and at the beginning of your end step, if you control 3 or more permanents you don't own, draw 3 cards. Now, while this only steals one thing in the deck because we don't have ways of blinking it, we do have some ways of reanimating it later if it dies. But the big thing here also is that we get to draw cards because we're going to control more than 3 things that we don't actually own with the way this deck is set up. So we're going to use this to steal probably the biggest, baddest threat that they have because it's a 7-drop. By then, they're going to have some big threatening things to steal from them. And then we're going to go ahead and go from there. As I was researching the deck for things that I could use to steal my opponent's things, I ran across Beguiler of Wills. For 3 blue, you get a 1/1 human wizard. Tap, gain control target creature with power less than or equal to the number of creatures you control. So the more creatures we've either stolen or cast from our own deck, the bigger the thing we can steal with Beguiler of Wills. We're also going to include a copy of a card that might make some people mad, especially in Commander, Empress Galena. For 3 blue, it's a 1/3 Merfolk Noble because it's been eroded. For 2 blue and a tap, gain control of target legend or legendary permanent. And then there's a reminder text that the effect does not end at the end of turn. And that little reminder text is why this card is not liked in Commander, because you can steal other opponents' commanders, you can steal their legendary enchantments and artifacts. There's all kinds of stuff that you can steal with Empress Galena, so it makes a great addition to this deck and the goals we're trying to achieve. Another card I stumbled across, which I think is kind of funny in this deck, is Thieving Amalgam. For 5 black, you get a 6/7 Ape Snake that says at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, you manifest the top card of that player's library. So you turn it face down as a 2/2 on your side. If it's a creature, you can pay the mana cost and flip it back up on its other side. And whenever a creature you control but don't own dies, its owner loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So these will actually come in on our side as 4/4s because Don Andres will give them the bonus stuff. They become death-touching, menacing pirates. And then if you can flip it over, we do have some treasure generation in the deck to actually fix our mana, and we have mana rocks and things like that. So we could possibly flip over something that's off color. But I just thought this was a cool addition as a way to steal, quote unquote, our opponent's creatures, or even turn their spells into creatures for us to steal from them. And the last creature I wanted to point out in this deck that steals their stuff is Thief of Sanity. For 1 blue, you get a 2/2 Spectre with flying, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, look at the top 3 cards of their library, exile 1 face down, put the rest into the graveyard, and you can look and cast that card for as long as it remains exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were any color to cast it. So with this, we actually kind of get a 2-for-1. We not only get to steal whatever the best 3 cards we reveal off the top of their deck are, but we also get to go ahead and ditch some other stuff as well. So if we need some kind of utility off of them, we can take the utility and dunk their threats into the graveyard, which actually comes in handy later with how we have this deck set up, and I'll point that out in a little while. Now, creatures aren't the only way we're going to steal our opponent's stuff. Let's take a look at some sorcerers and instants that do the same kind of thing for us, starting with Blatant Thievery, which is basically the best one of these kind of spells because we get to hit each of our opponents with it. For 4 triple blue, you get a sorcery that says for each opponent, gain control of target permanent that player controls. So you don't necessarily have to steal creatures, though with Don Andres, that's probably the best thing you can steal. But if they have something else that's really good, an enchantment or something like that, that's locking you down or locking all the table out of the board or whatever, or a combo piece, you can steal those and break their stuff. And it's just a cool card to go ahead and fuel our ambitions of stealing our opponent's things. I've also been looking for a home for Blue Sun's Twilight, and I haven't had a chance to find it. Well, this deck, I think it fits the bill. For X blue blue, you get a sorcery that says gain control of target creature with mana value X or less. If X is 5 or more, create a token copy of that creature. So the bigger the thing we steal with this, the more mana we dump into that X, we actually get 2 of that creature. Now, this, of course, doesn't work with legendary creatures, but if we're going to go ahead and copy some big threatening thing that's not a legend, we can go ahead and hit it and then steal it. And even if we don't get to keep a copy, if we're taking out a big threat with this and putting it on our side of the board, all to the better. In the same vein as Blue Sun's Twilight, we also have Entrancing Melody for X blue blue. You have a sorcery, gain control of target creature with converted mana cost of X. So this one's pretty straightforward. You pay X, you get to steal a creature, and you get to keep it until the end of the game or it dies. It's right on theme, and it's able to help us out with what we want to do with Don Andres. Another card I've been looking at and wanting to find a home for, but just couldn't quite figure out where to put it, is Subjugate the Hobbits for 5 blue blue. You get a sorcery, gain control of each non-commander creature with mana value 3 or less. There's going to be some games where this doesn't do a whole lot for us, and there's going to be some games where it's going to be an absolute massacre, especially people who are messing around with the token strategies, who are trying to generate bunches of tokens to try to run you over, and then you subjugate the hobbits. You're going to steal all of those little tiny creature tokens that they've been creating, because as long as they're not copying to create those tokens have a mana value of 0. So you're going to go ahead and just steal all of them, and they're going to be on your side, and then they're going to become +2/+2 menace and death touching pirates to come run your opponents over. Another pay X to steal a creature is Dominate for X1 blue blue. You get an instant that says gain control of target creature with converted mana cost X or less. So this one is a little bit of an upgrade over Entrancing Melody, because what we can do is pay that 1 extra colorless, and it allows this to be an instant speed spell. So at the end of somebody's turn, then you can dominate rather than doing it on your turn like you have to do with Entrancing Melody, and then you're able to go ahead and swing with that creature right away, because then it loses its summoning sickness as your turn begins. Then I also want to include a couple of counter spells that actually work well with the theme here. Well, first one is Aether Snatch for 4 blue blue. You get an instant gain control of target spell. You may choose new targets for it. So whatever the spell happens to be, whether it's the creature, non-creature, artifact, enchantment, whatever, we can actually go ahead and swipe that spell and cast it for ourselves. So this works really well with things that are uncounterable, or things that are just gonna decimate us. Go ahead and steal it and put it on our side of the board. And then the other counter is Desertion for 3 blue blue. You get an instant counter target spell. If an artifact or creature spell is countered this way, put that card onto the battlefield under your control instead of into its owner's graveyard. So again, we're trying to steal our opponent's creatures to turn them into big pirates to go beat our opponents up. And this is a great way to go ahead and to take the choicest thing that's coming down the pipe at you. And if you don't want your opponent having it, steal it, put it under your control, and go ahead and go ham. Now, all those creatures and those spells that I've just brought up, those are all permanent steals. You do them and you get to keep them until the creature dies or the game ends. So what else can we do with this stealing theme? Well, let's go take a look at some red cards that do temporary steals, and along with an artifact that also can do a temporary steal, and it also helps us get rid of our opponent's stuff in the process. So let's take a look at those cards now. First up is a card that came in the precon. It's Captivating Crew for 3 in a red. You get a 4/3 human pirate, 3 in a red, pay. Gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature. It gains haste until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. So even though we don't get to keep the creature, we still get to steal it. It becomes a pirate. It gains all the benefits off of Don Andres, and you can swing with it. And if somebody has to block, it dies. But otherwise, we also have ways in the deck of getting rid of our opponent's creatures by stealing them to our side and then sacrificing them. And we'll go ahead and mention some of those in a bit too. We also have Coercive Recruiter from the precon for 4 in a red. You get a 4/3 orc pirate. When it or another pirate enters the battlefield under your control, gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap it. It gains haste and becomes a pirate in addition to its other types. Now, the interesting part here is if we're able to either steal a creature of theirs and cast it, or use the amalgam to manifest one of their cards off their deck as a creature, this will trigger because they'll enter the battlefield as pirates, and then we'll be able to steal an additional creature from them. So I think that's kind of fun to mess around with and at least get a temp steal where we can then go ahead and either hit them with it or sacrifice it to our spells to do other things in our deck. This is more of a choice. You may or may not get anything out of this, but you're going to benefit one way or the other, and that is Seize the Spotlight for 2 in a red. You get a sorcery. Each opponent chooses Fame or Fortune. For each player who chose Fame, gain control of a creature that player controls until end of turn. Untap the creatures, they gain haste. For each player who chose Fortune, you get to draw a card and create a treasure token. So for your opponent, you're going to have a choice of damnations here. You're going to either give me cards, give me treasures, or you're going to give me your creature, and then I get to do whatever I want to with it, whether that's attack you with it, sacrifice it, or let you have it back. Then I'm going to slot in one of the newer cards that came out of the Lord of the Rings stuff. Call for Aid. For 4 and a red, you get a sorcery. Gain control of all creatures target opponent controls until end of turn. Untap those creatures. They gain haste until end of turn. You can't attack that player this turn. You can't sacrifice those creatures this turn. Now, while we can't sacrifice what we're stealing from them, we can get all of one player's stuff. So if, again, somebody's playing token synergies or they're just flooding the board with stuff, you can swipe all of their stuff, they become pirates and bigger, and then you just smash somebody in the face. Now, you can't attack that player, but you can attack somebody else and remove them from the game, quite possibly, or really mess their board state up. And anything that dies in combat, well, that's not of consequence to us. And then another card that's actually on theme from the Explorers of Ixalan board games, like weirdness that they put out back in the original Ixalan block, is a copy of Mass Mutiny. For 3 red, you get a sorcery that says for each opponent gain control of up to 1 target creature they control until end of turn. Untap, they gain haste, you know the drill. So this is just a nice way to grab one of each creature from our opponents, start swinging with them, or feed them into our sacrifice engines so that we can get rid of those creatures as we go along. And talking about things that we can feed into, we have Helm of Possession. For 4 colorless, you have an artifact that you can choose not to untap during your untap phase. You pay 2, tap, and sack a creature, gain control of target creature for as long as you control the helm, and it remains tapped. So this has an interesting synergy with our temporary theft stuff, because we can actually go ahead and do a temporary theft of a creature and then feed it to the Helm of Possession and then steal whatever else they have left on the board to go ahead and keep that as well. So in essence, for that 2 mana and a tap, and whatever amount of mana we pay to steal one of their stuff, we get to get rid of 2 of their creatures by gaining control of one and feeding the other one to the helm. And then you can keep doing this over and over, because then you can untap this during your untap phase if you don't want that creature anymore, or it's no longer useful, or there's a bigger threat on the board. Then you can go ahead, untap, let this thing go, or sacrifice the creature to one of your other things before the helm untaps, and then go after the next thing you got going on. And then the last temp steal card I wanted to kind of point out, and it's not temporary unless they remove it, is Olivia Voldaren, the original copy of this card. For 2, a black, and a red, you get a 3/3 vampire with flying. For 1 red, it deals 1 damage to another target creature, and that creature becomes a vampire in addition to its other types. You put a counter on Olivia, and then you can pay 3 black to gain control of target vampire for as long as you control Olivia. So needless to say, the goal here is to ping a creature with Olivia, it survives, and then you get to steal it for 5 mana, either in the same turn or further down the line as you go along. Maybe you just want to start pinging multiple things and setting up them being vampires, and then you can go ahead and get benefits out of that later by stealing them with Olivia. But as long as you have her, they don't get those creatures back. So she makes a good target to put like Lightning Greaves or Swiftfoot Boots or something like that on. If you don't have things going on any other way with Don Andres, you need to keep him protected, you can put it on her as well. Now, I mentioned earlier in the video that with Thief of Sanity bearing some of their cards, we have benefits coming from that with some of the other cards in the deck. Well, that's where the last category of theft comes in here, and that's reanimating their stuff from the graveyard, because you gain control of it that way as well. So let's take a look at those cards. First up, I wanted to include a copy of Puppeteer Click. For 3 black, 3/2 fairy wizard with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, put target creature card from an opponent's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. It gains haste at the beginning of your next end step, exile it, and then this has persist, so when it dies, if it has no negative counters on it, it returns to the battlefield and you get to steal something else out of their graveyard. Now, the great part here is you're going to get something back, you're going to get the benefit of controlling their thing, then it's gone for the rest of the game. So if there's something that's troublesome that you already killed once, this is a great way to get rid of it for the rest of the game. I'm also going to include a couple of auras that I love stealing opponent stuff out of their graveyard with, or reanimating my own things with Animate Dead. So that's a long, convoluted way to say you put this onto the battlefield, you get to reanimate a target creature out of a graveyard, slap this on it, and it gets -1, -0. But again, it's a great way to go ahead and steal something that you either killed, you already stole and sacrificed, or they discarded, or whatever way it got into their graveyard. This is a good way to get it on our side of the board to give it the benefits of Don Andres. And the same thing can be said of Dance of the Dead. For 1 and a black, you get an enchantment aura that says enchant creature card in a graveyard. Again, it's a big mouthful full of words to say. Put this into play, steal something out of their graveyard, put this on it, and then you get the additional benefit of the +1/+1, and the downside that it doesn't untap. But then again, you get to pay 1 in black and untap it every time you want to do that. Now, while this isn't quite as good as Animate Dead because we can't attack right away, because if you have something that gives haste, you can't go ahead and attack because this is tapped unless you have to wait for that upkeep trigger to untap it. But I like how these enchantments kind of act like pseudo graveyard hate because you're stealing the thing out of their yard that they may want to reanimate and put back under their own control, and you're stealing it for yourself. Now, if we don't want to deal with them blowing up the enchantments, we do have some spells that do the similar effect here. Let's start off with Beacon of Unrest. For 3 black, you get a sorcery, put target artifact or creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Shuffle Beacon of Unrest into its owner's library. So we get to reuse this spell as it gets shuffled back in. As long as we draw it again, we get to do it again. But this one has the benefit, like I said, that they can't blow up an enchantment to make us lose the creature. They have to kill the creature if they want us to lose it, and we can just reanimate it again with something else later on down the line. Also in this vein is Breaking Entering. This is a card that fits in because of our Grixis color scheme. The breaking side of the card, for blue-black, you get a sorcery that says target player puts the top 8 cards of their library into their graveyard, or the entering side for 4 black-red, and this is the part that's most interesting to us, is put a creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. It gains haste until end of turn. So while we could use breaking to go ahead and mill somebody to see what we could steal out of their graveyard, more than likely we're only going to be casting the entering side to actually do the stealing. And that's quite all right if we're actually getting something of great value, because 6 mana is quite a bit of mana to pay up to steal something when we have a lot cheaper cards in the deck that do that for us, but it's still a good include here. I'm also going to include a copy of Virtue of Persistence. For 5 black, you get an enchantment that has an adventure stapled onto it. The adventure side is for 1 and a black sorcery. Target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. You gain 2 life. And the enchantment that you paid 7 for at the beginning of your upkeep, put a target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. The cool part about Virtue of Persistence is it hits any graveyard. So as long as we are killing their stuff, or they're losing their things in battle, or whatever's going on, we're able to go ahead and steal that stuff to our side. Don Andres is going to pump it up, and they're going to have to keep tangling with these creatures turn after turn after turn if their things don't get exiled from their graveyard, or they do their own exiling to keep us from doing it. And a good reason somebody might want to exile their own graveyard in this deck is Command the Dreadhorde. For 4 black, you get a sorcery. Choose any number of target creature cards or planeswalker cards in graveyards. Command the Dreadhorde deals damage to you equal to the total converted mana cost of the cards. Put them onto the battlefield under your control. Now, you got to be careful with this card because it can kill you, but if you're going to finish somebody off or finish the entire game off, this could be worth it to go ahead and bring back a bunch of stuff all at once on your side of the board and be able to just go ahead and alpha strike somebody down by controlling the best stuff that's coming out of their graveyards. And then the last card I wanted to point out here is a creature. It's Gisa, Glorious Resurrector. For 2 black, you get a 4/4 human wizard. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. At the beginning of your upkeep, put all creature cards exiled with Gisa onto the battlefield under your control. They gain Decayed. So this is kind of a temporary steal in the vein of all the red stuff that we have going on here. But in this case, if their stuff dies in combat, or we kill it, or somebody else kills it while Gisa lives, it's going to get exiled. And then if she's still around when our upkeep comes around, we're going to gain control of those things on our side of the board. Even if we only get one swing with them, we are stealing them and banking those creatures for later. And we can do all kinds of stuff with this. So I wanted to include this in the deck because I thought it'd be kind of a fun way as a way to gain control of their creatures, even though we're not really killing them, reanimating them, or whatever's going on. So those are the highlights of the deck I call Join Me Crew. The full deck list is down in the description below. And while you're down there, if you like what I'm doing here, please subscribe and give likes, comments, all the good things like that. I do read all my comments. I do like to talk to people about cards and things that are going on in Magic in those comments. And as always, thank you for watching and have a great day.